Marine mocked her in the armory. Froze watching her strip that weapon completely blindfolded. Wrong weapon, sweetheart. That's a MARSOC issue M110 semi-automatic sniper system, not a toy for tech support girls who got lost on their way to the server room. The words cut through the armory like a blade scraping metal, clean and deliberate and unhurried, the way a man speaks when he has never once been corrected. Gunnery Sergeant Dale Rourke stood with his arms crossed inside the weapons cage at Camp Pendleton's Armory Block C, 47 Marines arranged in morning formation behind him on the concrete floor outside. He was broad across the chest, decorated across the same 6 rows of ribbons stacked above a combat action badge that caught the fluorescent light when he turned. He had not moved from his position in the doorway. He did not need to. His shadow fell across the workbench, across her hands, across every surface of the space she occupied, and that was enough. It said, "This is mine. This has always been mine. You are here at my sufferance, and I am deciding now whether that sufferance continues." The woman at the bench did not look up. She was 31 years old, though most of the men watching her would have guessed younger. Something about the plain utility of her appearance, the regulation bun, the unmarked utilities without a single piece of rank insignia to anchor her in the hierarchy. Her name tag read Cross. That was all. Sergeant Cross, according to the requisition order that had placed her in Armory Block C for what the documentation listed simply as Systems Assessment and Maintenance Inventory. She was small beside the rack of rifles, narrow-shouldered, and the M110 on her workbench dwarfed the workspace around her. Her hands were in motion, slow, purposeful. She had not flinched at the words, had not twitched, had not shifted her weight. The 47 Marines behind Rourke were watching her the way you watch something that hasn't reacted correctly to a stimulus, with the specific uncertainty of men whose model of the world has presented an unexpected result. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. Then she set down the bolt carrier group she was holding, with the kind of care that suggested the component was worth something, and she looked up. "It's a semi-auto sniper system," she said. "Not a rifle. Different trigger group, different suppressor thread pitch." Her voice was quiet, not weak. Quiet, the way a thing is quiet when it doesn't need to prove anything. Then she returned to the bolt carrier group. In the doorway, 14 feet away from the front row of formation, a man named Master Gunnery Sergeant Leonard Pruitt watched the exchange from the margin of the space. He was 63 years old and had spent 39 years in the Marine Corps, which meant he had seen approximately 11,000 training cycles, 400 equipment certifications, and a number of weapons handling demonstrations he had stopped counting somewhere around the year 2008. His pen was moving across a clipboard when the woman spoke. It stopped. He looked at her hands, the angle of her wrists over the bolt carrier group, the spacing of her fingers, the way her left hand indexed against the frame. Pruitt's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Something about this woman. He couldn't place it, but it was there. The afternoon brought new indignities. The story moved through the base the way stories move through formations, faster than orders and less accurate. By 1300, it had become the tech girl who talked back to Rourke in the weapons cage. By 1430, it was the clerk who told a gunny she didn't know weapons and then fumbled a disassembly. The embellishments accrued naturally, the way they always do, each telling adding a detail that made Rourke's authority more complete and her deficiency more obvious. The mess hall version included her dropping the bolt carrier group on the floor. She had not dropped anything. She ate alone at a corner table in the junior enlisted dining facility, which was the tactically optimal position, sight lines to 3 exits, back to a wall, sufficient distance from the central tables to observe without being obviously observed. Her tray held exactly what the line had offered. She ate it without ceremony. She was listening to 47 Marines talk about her. She was filing patterns. Who deferred to whom, where the informal authority structures diverged from the official ones. Who laughed loudest at Rourke's impression of her, and who laughed half a beat too late, which meant they weren't sure yet which way this was going to fall. 3 of the NCOs around the center table had not laughed at all. She noted them. Not because they were sympathetic, she did not require sympathy, but because men who withhold their reactions in social situations are usually men who have learned that reactions are expensive. Intelligence work. She appeared to be eating a meal that tasted like institutional efficiency. She was mapping a base. From the mess line, she had already cataloged 4 points of note. First, the Armory's inventory access terminal used the same authentication protocol as the NATO interoperable procurement system, which meant the quarterly code she carried had wider access than Rourke knew. Second, the base's security camera coverage had a gap on the northeast quadrant near the maintenance vehicle lot, which she filed in the same category as things that are useful when you understand what you are looking at. Third, Warrant Officer Elston had pulled up the Armory's maintenance logs twice in the last 2 days, on both occasions displaying the particular expression of a man who is finding a discrepancy he cannot yet explain. Fourth, Rourke had been on this base for 19 months, which was 8 months longer than a standard rotation. People who stay longer than standard rotations either have extremely good performance reviews or extremely good reasons to stay. She had read his performance reviews before she arrived. They were adequate, not exceptional. Her sleeve rode up slightly when she reached for her coffee, and the edge of a mark appeared above her left wrist, not a name, not a decorative image, not the kind of thing you get in a port city on leave. A sigil. Precise black lines arranged in a specific configuration that Sergeant Cross made no effort to conceal and no effort to display. It was simply there, the way a scar is simply there. Not quite hidden, not quite visible. The kind of mark that meant something specific to exactly the people who would recognize it. Across the dining facility, Master Gunnery Sergeant Pruitt carried his tray to a table 3 rows back. He sat down. He looked at the table. He looked at her wrist. His face did something careful and complicated. His pen had been in his breast pocket since the morning. He did not reach for it. By 07:58 the following morning, the weapons cage held 23 personnel, not a formal formation, just the specific density of people who have heard something worth watching. Rourke was back. He had brought his team, which meant 4 other NCOs of various grade, and also Warrant Officer Jaime Elston, who served as the Armory's range and qualification officer and had the distracted air of a man who was already composing his paperwork explanation for whatever was about to happen. "This," Rourke announced, "is a diagnostic exercise." He reached into the secured rack and pulled out a second M110 fully assembled. He set it on the bench across from Cross's workstation with the specific deliberateness of a man who has thought about this moment. "Tell me the malfunction rate on a standard firing cycle under elevated heat conditions." Cross looked at the weapon. "Which barrel configuration?" Rourke blinked. "What?" "The CSASS variant runs a 16-inch fluted barrel. Original M110 runs 20-inch. Heat dispersion profiles are different. Malfunction rates indexed to barrel mass." The room was quiet. Not completely quiet. The AC hummed, and someone shifted their weight on the concrete floor, boot scuffing a seam. But the particular quality of ambient sound had changed. Warrant Officer Elston's distracted air had evaporated. He was watching her. Rourke recovered. "Take it apart," he said. "The one you've been working on, all the way down, and since you're so familiar with the technical specifications..." He picked up a black cloth from the bench and held it out. "Do it blindfolded." He said it the way he said everything, for the room, not for her. Behind him, the 23 personnel shifted. A few of them had phones out, filming, quick and quiet, the way people film things they expect to be funny. There were sounds from the group, not quite laughs, the uncertain precursor to them, the intake of breath that waits to see if this is actually funny before committing. Cross looked at the cloth. "Timer?" she said. Rourke's expression shifted. A small cycling, surprise at the question, then recalibration, then the performance of confidence reasserting itself. 3 minutes, he said. "You've got 3 minutes. Clock starts when the blindfold goes on." She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. She took the cloth from his hand, tied it herself. Adjusted it once, a small, precise adjustment, the kind that came from doing this in environments where getting it wrong was not an option. Then she sat back down and put her hands on the M110, and she worked. Master Gunnery Sergeant Pruitt had positioned himself near the rear wall of the cage, which gave him a clear sightline to her hands. He had his clipboard. He was not writing on it. He watched the angle of her wrists, the spacing of her fingers, the sequence she chose, upper receiver first, then the charging handle, the bolt carrier group extracted with a single controlled motion, the gas tube checked by touch, the buffer spring removed without the slight fumble that appears in roughly 90% of even qualified shooters when vision is removed. Her hands did not pause, did not search, did not slow. She laid each component on the bench in a specific arrangement that was not random, not the arrangement that a manual would produce, but the arrangement that a field-qualified disassembly produces, organized for fastest possible reassembly under conditions where speed is life. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. She removed the blindfold. 19 components on the bench. All of them. Not one had touched the floor. The room did not make sounds for a long moment. Then Rourke's jaw tightened. His face cycled through something that was not quite what he intended it to be. "Luck," he said. "Input the quarterly authentication code into the system terminal," Warrant Officer Elston said quietly. He was looking at his own tablet now, not at Rourke. His voice had a different quality, careful, deliberate, the kind of voice a man uses when he is testing a hypothesis he has just formed. "For the maintenance registry, it needs to be updated." Cross walked to the terminal. Typed. 14 characters. The quarterly NATO interoperable certification code that required a clearance most of the people in the room did not hold, and which most qualified operators took between 4 and 6 minutes to retrieve from the proper documentation. She typed it in 9 seconds. From memory. Elston looked at his tablet. Then he looked at her. Something flickered across his face, just for a heartbeat. Then it was gone. He controlled his expression, but his hand was still, very still. Pruitt, in the back of the room, set his clipboard down on the shelf behind him. He did not pick it up again. The formal trouble arrived at 1400 in the form of a security incident report, which Rourke had filed through the base security office on grounds of credential irregularity. The documentation questioned whether Cross's access orders were legitimate, whether her security clearance had been properly verified through the current base system, and whether her presence in the weapons cage constituted an unauthorized access event. It was thorough work. Rourke had, presumably, spent some portion of his morning on it. 2 security NCOs arrived at her temporary quarters and escorted her, without physical contact, to the administrative holding facility, a room in the security building with concrete walls and a metal bench and a window near the ceiling that showed only sky. The room smelled of disinfectant and something older beneath it. The fluorescent light hummed. She sat on the bench. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. This is the near-fail moment. The point where anyone watching from the outside would think she's finished. Caught. Game over. Credentials pulled, access revoked, official complaint in process, and Gunnery Sergeant Dale Rourke probably already moving through the base with the specific satisfaction of a man who believes he has solved a problem. Except this was not the problem he thought it was. And she had not come to Camp Pendleton to pass a weapons diagnostic. She had come for Rourke. Not for the insults. Not for the theater of a grown man performing contempt for an audience of 47. For what was underneath it. A logistics chain she had spent 11 months tracing from a dead operator's last encrypted transmission. Through 3 shell companies, through a ghost procurement contract, to a base armory that was moving more than ammunition through its quarterly inventory. Cross looked at her watch. Military time. 14:37. In 18 minutes, her missed check-in would trigger an automated protocol she had filed with NCIS counterintelligence on the morning she arrived. In 61 minutes, a parallel request she had submitted from a terminal in the IT section, using the quarterly authentication code she had entered from memory because she had written it herself during a NATO equipment certification 3 years ago, would unlock a records access log that would show exactly where the inventory discrepancies lived and whose digital signature was attached to them. In approximately 2 hours and 14 minutes, the people who had received her check-in authorization would realize she was offline. Nobody had taken her watch. She had planned this 3 months ago. Her hands were still. Her breathing was controlled. She looked at the square of sky through the ceiling window and thought about nothing in particular. The way a person thinks about nothing in particular when they are waiting for something they designed to happen. The door opened at 14:49. It was not a security NCO. It was Master Gunnery Sergeant Leonard Pruitt, 39 years of Marine Corps service distributed across his frame in the particular way that career service distributes itself. Not muscular, exactly. Present. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides and looked at the woman sitting on the metal bench, and she looked back at him. "I'd be very careful," he said. He was not speaking to her. He said it to the security NCO who had accompanied him to the door, and the NCO looked at him, and something in Pruitt's face made the NCO choose to find other business. Pruitt stepped inside and let the door settle behind him. 39 years, he said. SOTG, MARSOC. 2 tours advising SEAL Team 6. Kandahar in 09, Ramadi in 06. He paused. The grip, your left hand. The way you index off the frame, not the way it's taught in any manual I've seen on this base. Only one school teaches that. He looked at her steadily. I wasn't sure when you were at the bench. I was sure at the terminal. Cross said nothing. The authentication code, Pruitt said. The quarterly NATO code. You didn't look it up. No, she said. I attended the NATO Equipment Standardization Certification in Ramstein in 2021, Pruitt said. There were 12 people in that room. I recognized the code. He let that sit. I'm going to suggest, he said, that whatever is happening here, it is considerably above the security incident Gunnery Sergeant Rourke thinks he filed. He paused. And I am going to suggest that the gunnery sergeant may want to reconsider several of his recent decisions before those decisions become more expensive than they already are. Cross looked at him. "Too late for that," she said. And at 14:51, the outer door to the administrative holding facility opened. And Master Gunnery Sergeant Pruitt turned toward the sound. And his expression did the thing it does when a man who has spent 39 years reading situations reads one correctly. They came in 4 vehicles, not base transport, not the standard sedans of the security office. Command birds, black Suburbans with federal plates, which on a Marine base produced a specific atmospheric effect. The way a particular frequency of sound produces a physical response in the chest without being consciously heard. 4 vehicles. And from the first vehicle, 2 federal agents in civilian dress, carrying the kind of credentials whose cover color produced an involuntary straightening of posture in everyone who saw them. And from the second, a Navy captain and 2 colonels in service dress, ribbons and all. And from the third, a man in a dark suit with the quiet assurance of someone who answers to no one present, carrying a leather portfolio that he did not open in the parking lot. Not a social visit, not nearly. The 4th vehicle stayed closed. Its windows were opaque. Nobody got out. Gunnery Sergeant Dale Rourke was on the parade ground when the vehicles arrived, and the word moved to him the way words move in a military environment, instantly, imprecisely, and with a quality of urgency that was impossible to mistake. He walked toward the administrative building with the controlled stride of a man who has filed the correct paperwork and is therefore confident. He arrived as the federal agents were speaking to the security NCO at the desk. The Navy captain was reading something on a tablet. The man with the leather portfolio was standing to one side, saying nothing, watching everything. Rourke drew himself up, introduced himself by rank and name, which was appropriate and professional, and also revealed, to anyone paying attention, that he expected his rank and name to mean something to these people. They did not. The federal agent, a woman, late 40s, hair pulled back, the kind of posture that comes from a career of entering rooms where she was not entirely welcome, looked at him with the specific patience of a person who has time and knows it, and knows that the person she's looking at does not. "We're here for the individual in administrative holding," she said. "Credential irregularity case." "I filed that report," Rourke said. His voice had the correct authority. The individual's access orders required verification. "They've been verified," the agent said. She looked at the NCO. "Release her." Rourke's jaw tightened. "I'd like to understand the chain of authority here." "You'd like to understand," the agent said. The patience in her voice had not changed. That was somehow worse than if it had. "What you need to understand, Gunnery Sergeant, is that the individual you flagged for credential irregularity was here on active federal authority at a classification level above everyone currently present in this building, including the 2 colonels who drove 4 hours to stand in this hallway." She paused. "Including me." The room detonated. Gasps, actual audible gasps, from the security NCO, from a corporal who had been standing near the filing cabinet, from Warrant Officer Elston, who had arrived sometime in the last 5 minutes and was now pressed against the far wall with the expression of a man whose hypothesis has been confirmed in a way that is significantly larger than the hypothesis. Someone dropped a tablet. The clatter echoed off the concrete like a gunshot in the stunned air. The AC hum seemed suddenly, inexplicably loud. The door to the holding room opened. Cross walked out. She was wearing the same unmarked utilities, the same regulation bun. The M110 maintenance manual she had been working from was under one arm, the way you carry something you intend to finish. The man with the leather portfolio looked at her. He opened it. Inside, a set of orders, and beneath the orders, a document stamped "Classified" red in block letters, and beneath that, a personnel file that was not formatted the way standard Marine Corps personnel files are formatted. It was formatted the way the other files are formatted. The ones most people in the military do not know exist. He offered it to the Navy captain, who read the first page. The captain's face cycled through the phases, reading comprehension, something that was not quite surprise because experienced officers do not show surprise, and then something else, something underneath the professional surface, which was the recognition of a name. Not Cross. The name beneath Cross. The operational designation. The call sign that the captain had last seen in a classified briefing summary from a mission that was officially listed as completed and the operator officially listed as withdrawn. The captain looked up. He looked at Cross. He looked at her wrist, the mark above her left wrist that had been visible for a fraction of a second at the dining facility. That was visible now because her sleeve had ridden up as she reached for the document, visible in the fluorescent light of the hallway. Precise black lines arranged in a specific configuration. A sigil. Not decorative, not personal. The kind of mark that is placed on a specific kind of body, at a specific kind of school as a record of a specific kind of qualification that most of the Marine Corps has never heard of. A tattoo. The captain's blood ran cold. He had seen that mark exactly twice before. Once in a classified briefing room in Stuttgart. Once on the operational record of an asset who was listed in current NCIS files as extracted and inactive. Not Cross, the name beneath Cross, the designation, the call sign that a Navy captain who had attended a classified briefing in Stuttgart in 2021 had seen attached to an operational record that described the kind of work that keeps people awake at night, even when they aren't the ones doing it. His hand moved. Not fast, not theatrical. Slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who has saluted heads of state and joint chiefs and understands exactly what the gesture carries when it is chosen rather than commanded. His hand came up, wrist crisp, edge of palm to his brow. He held it. 1 second. 2. The first colonel looked at the captain's face, looked at the tattoo, looked at the personnel file. His hand came up. The second colonel raised his. The federal agent, after a pause, after looking at the tattoo and the file and the captain's expression and running her own calculation, raised hers. Master Gunnery Sergeant Leonard Pruitt, standing in the hallway where he had positioned himself to see all of this, raised his hand. He did it quietly and without announcement, the way you do something you have chosen because you understand what you are honoring, not because anyone ordered you to. 4 salutes. In the held air of the administrative hallway on the northeast side of Camp Pendleton, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a space that smelled of disinfectant and institutional coffee, and the specific tension of a situation that is resolved in a direction nobody except one person anticipated. Cross stood in the door of the holding room and looked at all of it. She did not smile. She did not speak. She gave the salute back, precise, regulation. The kind of practiced reflex that becomes invisible until it matters. And then she let it fall. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, the federal agent said. Her voice was the quietest it had been. Please come with us. Rourke's face had gone through its stages while the salutes were raised. Surprise in the first second, denial somewhere in the middle, and now something that sat in his chest and pressed against his expression from the inside, something that looked, if you were experienced enough to read it, a great deal like genuine fear. Not the theatrical kind, not performed. The real kind, which is quieter and harder to look at. He did not speak. The fourth vehicle's door opened. 2 more federal agents stepped out. They wore the same civilian dress, the same quiet assurance of people who have paperwork and patience and the full weight of a federal warrant behind them. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and orderly and institutional, the way consequences are when they are federal in origin and months in the making. The handcuffs produced almost no sound. Rourke walked without resistance, with the mechanical compliance of a man who is still calculating and finding the numbers do not work, who is running alternative scenarios and finding each one closed, who is beginning to understand that the woman he put in a holding room with a credential complaint had been building this case since before she ever walked into his armory. She had. He had been moving ordnance through the inventory system for 19 months. Ghost line items, equipment logged as received, equipment logged as expended in training, equipment that passed through the system as data without ever physically arriving or departing, because the paper trail was cleaner than the alternative. 3 shell procurement channels, 2 of them registered in Delaware, 1 in the Cayman Islands, each one receiving and transmitting funds that corresponded to equipment that corresponded to inventory discrepancies, that corresponded to a pattern that a dead operator named Staff Sergeant Marcus Garcia had spent his last 8 months mapping. Garcia had been working it from the financial side, which was slow. He had found the shell companies. He had found the procurement contracts. He had been 3 months from identifying the man above Rourke in the network, when his vehicle went off a highway outside of Oceanside on a Tuesday night, with no witnesses and no camera coverage. The official report listed it as a non-combat accident. The investigation was shelved. Rourke's recommendation. Cross had Garcia's notes. All of them. The encrypted drive that his sister had been holding without knowing what it contained. The kind of thing a cautious man leaves with family, because he knows that operational networks do not disappear files from civilian locations the same way they disappear them from secure servers. She had the notes, and the encrypted transmission Garcia had filed to NCIS counterintelligence 3 days before the accident, and 11 months of her own work building from his toward the man above Rourke, whose name she still did not have. The 4th vehicle pulled out of the lot. Rourke was in it. The man with the leather portfolio watched it go. Then he looked at Cross with the expression of someone who has reviewed a file and found it considerably denser than the briefing summary suggested. "The secondary targets," he said. "In the documentation," she said. "Tab 4. He nodded. "We'll need you in Washington." "I know," she said. "Wednesday." "I'll be there Tuesday," she said. "I have a stop to make." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded again, the kind of nod that means understood and also means I am not going to ask, and walked back toward the 3rd vehicle. Warrant Officer Elston had been cleared 40 minutes earlier. He had come back anyway. He was standing near the fence line, hands in pockets, not quite sure what the protocol was for this moment. Which was not a moment that had a protocol. He had noticed things for 3 weeks, things in the inventory logs, anomalies in the equipment receipts, a pattern he couldn't name. And he had been doing the thing that people do when they find a pattern they cannot name, which is look at it again and again and hope it resolves into something harmless. It had not. He would spend the next several months thinking about whether he should have said something sooner. He would decide eventually that the calculus was more complicated than that, because the people running the scheme were the people you would report it to. And knowing that requires knowing that the scheme exists. And knowing that the scheme exists requires being the kind of person who is looking for it. He had not been looking for it. She had. He looked at her across the parking lot. She gave him a nod, small, unceremonious, the acknowledgement of a colleague who understands what you are thinking about. He nodded back. Then he left. By 1700, the base was quiet in the specific way that bases are quiet after something they will talk about for years. Cross was in a temporary office that had been provided without ceremony, working through the documentation with the federal case agent, a process that would take approximately 14 more hours and required nothing dramatic from anyone. Warrant Officer Elston had been questioned and cleared within the first 90 minutes. He had noticed things but not known what they meant, which was different, and the distinction mattered. He had shaken her hand when they released him. He had not said anything. She had not expected him to. Pruitt came by once, at 1640. He did not knock. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and looked at the scene, the documents, the federal agent, the woman at the desk who had been a systems maintenance tech 4 hours ago and was now something else that he would not be cleared to discuss. "Garcia," he said. She looked up. "Did you know him?" "Yes," she said. He nodded once. Slow. The kind of nod that carries something it doesn't put into words. Then he left. At 18:30, she stepped outside. The evening had settled over the base in the specific way that Pacific Coast evenings settle, not sudden, just a gradual withdrawal of heat, a change in the quality of the light. The sky at dusk ran in bands of orange and deep purple at the horizon, the kind of California sunset that doesn't apologize for itself. Her watch read 1833. They mocked her hands. They forgot those hands had built the case that ended them. Silence is a weapon too. She had been using it for 11 months. She looked at the horizon for a long moment. The case against Rourke was documented. The procurement chain was documented. The men above him in the network, and there were men above him in the network, the kind whose names appeared on classified rosters, and whose connection to this operation would take another 3 months to prove, were in the file on the desk behind her, under a tab labeled Secondary Targets. One name on that list had no photograph, only a description. Male, mid-50s, confirmed presence in Ramstein, 2021. Had access to the same NATO standardization documents that authenticated the Ghost procurement contracts. Someone who had been in the room. Someone who knew the systems. A surveillance image from a server in Stuttgart showed a corner of a parking structure and the back of a man walking away. She did not have his face. She had his walk. It would be enough. She controlled her breathing. 4 in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. Then she went back inside, because the work was not finished, and the work was never finished. And tomorrow would bring another name to find and another thread to follow until the last one on Garcia's list was answered. Tomorrow brought new ghosts to hunt. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to MVP Stories for more.